Hello and welcome. This is Martha Malone with the Industrial Research Institute, and I am happy to welcome you to our brown bag today on strategic portfolio management. I am also joined here by Michelle Tauzik at IRI, and we'll introduce our presenters here really quickly. The session today is brought to you by IRI industry partner Planisware. We're happy to have them here with us. And I'll go over a few logistics as we get started. All attendees will be in mute for the first part of the session. We will have a couple of points to ask questions throughout the presentation, and at the very end we'll open it up for folks to be able to actually be unmuted and raise their hand. But please feel free to key in a question you have into a question box at any time, even before we get to a point for a question, if there's something that you would like to ask of the presenters. Again, this session is being recorded. The recording will be available to folks after the session on iriweb.org, and we will be sending out the slides to all the participants after the session, as well as the link to the recording. So please look for that. It could be next week sometime, early next week, if not later today. So again, thank you again to Planisware for bringing us this webinar today, and I'd like to introduce you first to Michel Delafort. He is the Sales Director at Planisware, which is a Gartner-recognized provider of product portfolio management software and services. He's an internationally experienced executive with a passion for and proven ability to identify value-added solutions for organizations focused on innovation. He's helped numerous organizations get innovation to market, and Michel has also had the immense privilege of working under Dr. Bob Cooper's leadership for 5 years and partnering with him in various capacities for the past 17 years. Again, welcome everyone, and I will turn it over to Michel.
Thank you very much, Martha. I am delighted to be sponsoring this event with the Industrial Research Institute today. My name is Michel Delafort, and as Martha said, I'm a sales director with Planisware. Planisware is the name of the company as well as the product. Planisware is a project portfolio management software focusing on supporting the new product development business processes from end to end. And we've been in business with top leaders in innovation for over 20 years. Planisware has over 300 corporate clients serviced from 10 locations across North America. In recent years, we've been highlighting thought leaders such as Dr. Cooper at our user conferences. And when our customers have asked for more substantial business learning formats, we decided to enhance our software services by offering and sponsoring education dedicated to process improvement in NPD, new product development. We have launched the Planisware Center for Excellence to champion, on one hand, established, proven best practices in project portfolio, such as today's topic, as well as emerging and promising practices for NPD organizations. As Martha said, I was fortunate to work with Dr. Cooper for many, many years, and we've been engaged delivering workshops and guiding clients ever since. And now, my tremendous privilege in introducing Bob. Bob Cooper is a world expert in the field of management of new product development and product innovation. Bob has written 7 books on the topic and has published more than 120 articles. He is the creator of the globally employed stage gate process used to drive new products to market. He's a fellow of the Product Development and Management Association, the PDMA. He is an ISBM Distinguished Research Fellow at Penn State University as well. He's a noted consultant and advisor to Fortune 500 firms. He also gives public and in-house seminars globally. Bob divides his home life between Toronto, Ontario, and Sarasota, Florida. Many of Bob's publications have appeared in leading magazines and journals. Next slide, please. And Bob, by the way, this is a beautiful picture of you. Bob will be running our masterclass in Chicago on June 13 and 14. Click next, please. And that will focus on innovation strategy and portfolio management. Again, June 13 and 14 in Chicago. I will also be the host of that event. Bob Thank you for agreeing to present this session with us. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Michel and Martha and everyone else who's tuned in this morning or this afternoon. And let's get underway. The topic is portfolio management and innovation strategy. That's the topic of the seminar, the masterclass seminar that Michel's organization is hosting in Chicago, and it's also the topic of this session. Now, we have a book out on this topic, and let me tell you, it's a complex topic. The book, which is probably about 300 pages, doesn't do it justice. So I think you're going to be, we're going to be a little pressed for time here to get into the kind of granularity that some of you might want to get into. And I guess that's why we do the webinar, but we're also hoping that you'll have enough interest to come to the seminar as well, where we have 2 quality days to delve into the topic in a little more depth. Before we get into this, we've done a number of studies with the American Productivity and Quality Center in Houston, which I guess is the largest not-for-profit benchmarking society in the world. Now, they focused on product quality for many, many years, but in more recent decades, they've started to look at things upstream from manufacturing, such as R&D and product design, etc. And in our benchmarking studies with their many, many member companies, and they're in the hundreds, thousands, we find that 4 themes stand out as the key to success. When we look at highly successful, innovative companies that make a lot of money and achieve their objectives, etc., 4 things consistently stand out. And the first one is successful businesses in product development seem to have a robust, well-articulated, well-communicated, and right-on product innovation and technology strategy. That's up at the top of this diamond. The second theme is they make the right investment decisions. So not only do they have a strategy that gives them direction, they put their money where their mouth is and actually make the right investment decisions, which is what portfolio management is all about. Portfolio management is a relatively new term in the lexicon of new product development terminology. It first came to the fore about 1993 when some group in Boston, I think it was Arthur D. Little, published a book called Third Generation R&D, where they talked about making the right investment decisions and borrowed a term from the financial community, namely portfolio management, the same kind of term they would use to manage your pension plan or something. And many of the techniques that financial portfolio managers use, with modification, it was argued, could be applied to product development, because what we see in product development is that every R&D project or every new product project is an investment. And just like investments in the stock market, they can be managed. They can be managed, you know, when to buy high, when to, you know, when to sell high, when to sell low, etc. And some of these same techniques can be applied with significant modification. So that's what portfolio management is about. It is not project management, by the way. It's portfolio management, making the right go-kill decisions. 2 other things, since I have this diagram up here, 2 other things you might want to think about, not the topic of today's discussion, is execution. And that's at the bottom of the diagram. Having an effective idea to launch system, or as Michel had pointed out, I came up with the stage gate process some years ago. Most companies in the United States, and in fact globally, in the Western world anyway, are using some version or variant of stage gate. Michel's organization is sponsoring another event in California in the fall, where we get into what's new in StageGate, and Michel might want to get some information to you on that later. And finally, and a very important topic, and one, again, not for today, but something you should keep in mind, this diagram wouldn't be complete without it, and that is the people side of the equation. Having a positive climate and culture that fosters innovation within the corporation and the right leadership from the top. So these are the 4 elements that we find common to successful businesses. As a bit of a sanity check here, you might want to judge yourself or measure yourself on each of these. Do we have a well-articulated, robust, and right-on product and innovation and technology strategy? Do we have a portfolio management system that helps us make the right investment decisions? Do we have an effective idea to launch system, an up-to-date, proficient, well-oiled, adaptive, agile an accelerated process to get new products to market? And finally, do we have the right climate, culture, and leadership? These are the 4 keys to success. Now, let's spend a little bit of time on the top one here that I've just highlighted, and that is the first part of our session today, a product innovation and technology strategy. Here are some of the things we find. New product development goals and objectives. NPD is new product development. About 38% of companies actually have well-defined, clearly articulated SMART goals and objectives. Isn't that shocking? You sort of wonder what happened to the other 62% of firms. By the way, when we look at top performing businesses, and these darker bars are the best performers in the sample of, this is the APQC in Houston again, this is the top performers. About half of them actually have clear goals and objectives. And here we have the not so good firms. These are the poor performers. So a very typical objective might be one that 3M uses, and I've disguised the numbers a little bit here, but for example, a very typical objective at 3M is 30%, in this business unit, 30% of our sales by the year 2020 will come from new products we've launched in the last 5 years. In other words, and they call that the NPVI, or New Product Innovation, New Product Vitality Index. It's the percentage of sales generated from new products. Some people translate that into a dollar figure, but very, very clear, time frame attached, very specific, measurable. I go into a lot of companies and they talk about goals and objectives in wishy-washy words, things that are not measurable, no time frame attached. Take a hard look at your goals and objectives. Do you have them? Another key might be, another key we find is that the role of new product development or product innovation is clearly articulated in achieving the business's goals. So for example, and one European company I was into not so long ago, and the owner of the business, and it was a family-owned, very, very large global company, in Austria, as a matter of fact. They're in the crystal business. You probably know who I mean. You see them in every airport and shopping mall, it seems. Anyway, you know, the head of the business was basically saying, I want to see the business double in the next 5 years, double in size. And he says, I'm not sure we're going to achieve that through just opening more stores. What clearly is that new product development is going to have to generate half those sales. In other words, he was clearly articulating the role of new product development in achieving the overall business goal. And once again, we see the top performing businesses do this, have a higher tendency of doing this, the poor performers no. A long-term commitment. You know, I go into some companies and the objectives and goals are basically a year or two out, or you say, what's your new product strategy? They show you a list of projects for this year. I'm sorry, that's not a strategy. That's what you're going to do this year. Strategy is typically 3 to 5 years, some companies even longer in terms of where they're going with their new product efforts, new product programs. Strategic arenas defined. One of the key, let me just back up here. Does anyone know what the word strategy means? I often ask this in my seminars and I get a lot of blank stares. It's actually not an English-derived word. It's not a French word either or a German word. It's actually a Greek word, and it means the art of the general, the art of the military commander. And a lot of what we practice in business in the world of strategy has its roots as far back as 500 BC with the famous book called The Art of War, written in China. And one of the key principles in any military command, other than having clearly defined objectives, the other key principle is the principle of mass. In other words, focus. Concentrate your efforts and hit hard at one point rather than spreading yourself across a long, long line and trying to attack. You're dissipating your effort, in other words, and you're sure to set yourself up for failure. Well, one of the keys to knowing where to attack is having defined strategic arenas, or I guess in military jargon, having defined battlefields. And we find that a lot of companies have these, and as you can see, these percentages are quite high. The trouble is when you lower the microscope and get very specific, we find a lot of them are pretty lame. They're tired, they're sterile, they're barren, there's not much there. It's the same old areas we've been beating ourselves up in for the last decade or two. Take a hard look at the strategic arenas where you have defined as fair game, areas of strategic focus for your R&D efforts and their priorities, and then ask yourself, are they clearly defined, and are they the right areas? Are they robust, rich areas that that are going to generate the next engines of growth for our business? Another element of strategy is strategic buckets. putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. Strategy becomes real when you start spending money. So a lot of companies have very nice statements about where they want to attack and how they want to attack and where they want to win and which markets and technologies, but they really haven't said, and in order to achieve that, we plan to spend 2/3 of our R&D budget in this particular market in order to seize the day. And that's what strategic bucket is all about. And I'll get into that in a little bit later. This is a newer concept, and a lot of companies that have implemented it and done very, very well with it. And finally, road mapping. I'm surprised that not more of us have roadmaps in place. I'm talking strategic roadmaps, not this year's releases of a whole bunch of variants of the product. In other words, what are the major initiatives? In order to achieve our objectives, what major initiatives do we have to launch over the next 5 years? And obviously a roadmap is a tentative allocation of resources. It makes certain there are place marks in place, so that we have at least a vision of what new products we're going to launch. Now, obviously, if you're planning, if you're doing a roadmap for 5 years out, you can't forecast 5 years. But what most people say is, look, it's a rolling roadmap. You know, we implement the first year, and we have a 4-year vision thereafter, and it's updated every year, and that's sort of the notion. Very, very useful exercise, and obviously an attempt to translate strategy, words in a document, into action, specific actionable projects that we're going to do this year and next year and the year after. One of the things you see here is that there's a huge difference on this chart between the very top performers, the dark blue guys, and the not so good companies, the companies that are doing lousy at product development. That's the pastel green here. And it sort of speaks to the point that not only is strategy does it make sense, but it is proven to be strongly correlated with performance. In other words, if you do a good strategy, if you develop and implement a good strategy, you will be rewarded with much higher new product performance. Now, what are the major steps? Strategy just doesn't happen in an afternoon of sitting around discussing at some conference what you're going to do. Usually most people go through some kind of a strategy process, hopefully once a year, at least an update once a year, where we start with defining goals for new product development. And I've already talked a little bit about the goals, the role of new product development in your business strategy. For example, a statement that we're going to double the size of our business in the next 10 years or 5 years, and 50% of that's going to come from new products. And then specific goals and objectives for new product development, like the 3M one. 30% of our sales in the year 2020 are going to come from new products that we've launched in the previous 5 years. The next, moving down the diagram, the next thing is many people spend a lot of time thinking about where we're going to find all these great new products and all these dollar sales. And that's this notion of defining the battlefields, or the strategic arenas, as we call them. And we get into strat mapping, and I'll get into this a little bit as the session goes on here. Once we've decided where we're going to attack, in other words, which markets, products, product lines, technologies, where we're going to focus our efforts, once we decided that, then it's time to move down to item number 3 here, how we're going to win. I mean, it's fine to say we want to get into technology X, or we want to emphasize product category Y a little more in our R&D efforts, but having said that, what are we going to do about it? What's our investment strategy? How much money are we prepared to spend here? What's our strategic thrust? Are we going to win by being the low-cost guy, the innovator? And what's our entry strategy if it's a totally new area to us? Are we going to go in alone? Are we going to go in with partners? How are we going to win? Something that a lot of companies don't get into enough. They define areas of focus, but then they don't follow through and say how we're going to win the day. Then we get down to the next level of strategy. And this is getting more into portfolio management. Some people call it strategic portfolio management. And that is translating our strategy into spending decisions, or using a military analogy, into deployment of forces, putting boots on the ground, so to speak. And there's a couple of different things. One is the resource commitment in general, how much we're going to spend overall, R&D budgets, for example, by business unit. Another key one is strategic buckets, where that money or resources, person power, where it's going to go. And finally, road mapping. which projects do we envision or envisage doing over the next 5 or 7 years? And this is translating strategy into reality. And now we're moving down to tactical, moving away from the topic of strategy, but moving down into tactical decisions. And this really gets into the guts of portfolio management. Project selection, or making go-kill decisions on an ongoing basis. Project prioritization, done either at gate meetings or at portfolio reviews. And finally, commitment of resources to projects, to R&D projects. And that's people as well as dollars. And here I just show a sample of some of the tools, etc., that one often sees when one gets into the issue of project selection, project prioritization, and resource allocation. So this is a grand scheme for how all these different bits and pieces fit together. I find a lot of people get very confused. They're working on one piece of this puzzle and often don't see the big picture. But I think this diagram that I've just gone through does give a much better idea of where all the different elements and pieces fit together. So basically the major steps, one of the things we deal with, having dealt with the topic of setting objectives and goals, and we do spend quite a bit of that on the seminar, don't have the time right now, but that another big area and a fascinating area is, where do we want to play the game? In which arenas, in order to win the day? And we spend quite a bit of time on picking the right areas of strategic focus. As one person said to me, one executive said to me, Bob, there's 2 ways to win at new products. One way is to do projects right. And he says, and that's what your stage gate process is all about. It's tactical, it's about execution, it's about what you do in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 as you move through the model. But the other way to win at new products, and it's far more important, is do the right projects, be in the right areas. And as he pointed out, he said, even a blind person can get rich in a gold mine by swinging a pickaxe. If you're in the wrong mine, no matter how hard you dig and how hard you work, you ain't going to get rich. But if you're in the right mine, in the right area, and doing the right projects, even merely adequate execution will make you money. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that you're playing on the right playing field, in the right strategic arena. And we find a lot of businesses are incredibly lacking here. They're in areas that are barren, sterile, and simply have no headroom for serious product development. We start out with a pretty good industry assessment and a company analysis to identify a list of possible strategic arenas. And the art of good management here is having lots of good options. Far too often companies limit themselves to 1 or 2 possible fields and then wonder why they end up with fields that aren't so interesting. And then we get into an exercise of how you identify these, and next how you pick them, the selection of the hot areas. And then once you've picked areas of strategic focus, moving into generating ideas within these selected arenas, such as defining unmet needs, defining customer problems, profit voids, emerging areas. And finally, that leads you to new products and new solutions that you get underway. The major development initiatives, the product roadmap, the technology roadmap, etc., the projects you plan to do in order to realize your strategy. So there's a very logical sequence here. But I want to spend a little bit of time over on the pink sections of this diagram, which is really the guts of strategy, deciding where you're going to play the game. The industry and market analysis, and we take you through this in agonizing depth, developing maps of the value chain upstream and downstream, undertaking industry structure analysis, identifying your customer's industry drivers and potential shifts in these, undertaking trend analysis, market mapping, trying to identify pockets in the marketplace where there is money to be made, looking at disruptive technologies as a potential source for some ahas, and finally peripheral visioning. All of these are some of the tools that people use and we use in order to identify areas of interest, areas of potential where you might want to focus your R&D effort. And the goal, of course, is to identify a good number, not just 1 or 2, a good number of these that you can then begin to assess and lower the microscope on and then finally pick the one or two hot ones that you really want to focus on. A core competency assessment is part of this analysis. A core competency is obviously something you can do that's better than your competitors, that's critical to helping you create new products and services, achieving competitive advantage, and it has three characteristics. And a lot of people get this wrong. A lot of people think a core competency is simply a strength. Not so. A core competency is a core competency if it has these three things. Number one, provides potential access to a wide variety of markets. In other words, it's not so narrow as to be next to useless. Number two, it should make a significant contribution to perceived customer benefits. In other words, you should be able to leverage your core competency to build a wow factor into your products or services, and it should be difficult for the next person to copy you. It should be something that's fairly unique to you. So the goal then is basically to identify strategic arenas. The same diagram again, I'll just take you through it. A strategic arena, well, think of these as battlefields or playing fields where we want to play the game. What are they? Well, hard to define sometimes, but most people, when you stand back and take a look at the strategy, in most cases it deals with markets, market segments, or market sectors. Strategic arenas can also be product types, product lines, product categories, or product classes. They can also be technologies, technology A, technology B, or any combination of these. For example, the product market matrix. This is a product market matrix, for example, from a telco, a telephone company, where they talk about voice, data, internet products, and down the side are their various market segments, and each of these cells represents a strategic arena. For example, developing data products for small business home office. And these stars simply represent areas of strategic focus where we plan to attack, where we plan to deploy our resources. So this is a very classic product market matrix, and there's a number of other tools like this that people use to visualize the possible playing fields where they could play the game. The next goal, the next step here is actually to develop a Strat-Map or strategic map. And basically there's two fundamental questions we always look at whenever we're looking at a new battlefield, a new possible arena where you might want to play the game. The first one is an external metric, and that's the vertical axis here. And it basically says, is this a rich and interesting area? Like, what do we win if we win? Is this an oasis? Or is this a sterile desert where there's nothing but sand and we're not going to find very much gold out here? And so that's a very, very important dimension. The other one is our business strength. And you've often heard the old adage, always attack from strengths, never attack from weaknesses. Well, it's true. We find again and again and again when companies attack from strengths, they have about a 2 to 3 times chance of winning versus companies that are attacking from non-strength areas. So one of the questions we're always asking is this strategic arena, is this battlefield an area where we could deploy our strengths to advantage? And out of this comes a 4-dimensional matrix, and I'll just sort of flip up what it is here. In the upper right-hand corner, these are the best bet arenas. These 2 circles here are designate strategic arenas. These are high opportunity arenas where we can leverage our business strength, and also they happen to be very, very attractive. And over here in the polar opposite are the no bets, areas that don't build on our strengths or simply not very, and also are not very attractive. And then there's 2 others sort of high on one, low on the other, etc. I think you get the idea. Basically what we do is we take and it's typically about 10 possible arenas in the business, and we basically do an assessment. Go out, do some due diligence, get some data, come back, sit around, have some discussion on these, and then try to position them on this Strat-Map in order to figure out which are the one or ones that we designate as the top key areas of focus for our business. And this is sort of the first step in strategy development, deciding where we want to play the game or which battlefields or playing fields do we want to focus our efforts on. At this point, I'm just going to take a bit of a pause to see if there are some questions coming in before I move into the guts of drilling down a little bit more into these topics.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
Go ahead.
We often hear, and actually this is the topic and the title of this presentation, but who should be developing this innovation strategy? Is it product managers or the head of R&D? And how do we get started?
Well, that's a very good question, Michel. And I think the first hint is the name strategy is the art of the general. So it usually means that while all the work isn't done by the senior people, they've got to be very clearly involved and engaged in this process. The product managers, the R&D managers, they're going to provide a lot of the data and do a lot of the heavy lifting, but I find the best exercise to go through is where the leadership team of the business unit takes charge here and goes through a process starting with defining our objectives and goals, and then identifying possible strategic arenas where we could play the game, then picking the areas where we want to play the game, etc. And typically it's a series of off-site meetings out of the office in which the head of the business unit and his or her direct reports, like head of R&D, head of marketing, head of manufacturing, finance, and so on, get together along with next level down people like product managers, R&D managers, etc. And you know, typically, you know, it can be a fairly sizable group. I mean, it's not a cast of thousands, but it's not just one or two people clustered away in a room together. So, and this is a process that is multifaceted, cross-functional, led by the top. A lot of the work done, however, by the middle level, ordinary people in the organization. So a lot of input, obviously, from product managers and a lot of input from R&D managers, as well as other folks in the company, finance and production as well, and sales. So it really is a business effort, not just an R&D or marketing effort, very much so. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have a few questions too here, Bob. So the first one was really kind of a focus. Does this information relate to service industries or just product development? Kind of speak to that a little bit.
I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. When I use the word product, I mean anything that you take to a marketplace for acquisition or consumption for which you are paid money. Okay, in other words, that can be a service, it can be a software, it can be a combination of service, physical product, and software, anything. What I exclude is freebies like tech service and support. Those sort of things I don't normally consider as a product, but everything else you take to a marketplace and charge money for, that's a product. And so certainly this applies very, very, I've used this methodology in banks, financial institutions, and so on, and it works equally as well.
Yeah.
Good question.
So another question, and I see a number of them coming across, so this is good. You're sparking some interest. Good. So one question on the strategic arenas, talk to us a little bit about how this is different from defining the market.
Oh, a strategic arena might be a market or a market segment or a market sector, but it could also be a technology. For example, I've heard companies say that, like a company that was in the beer industry, you know, one of our areas of strategic focus is the focus on aseptic packaging. Another, or high gravity brewing. I mean, that's a technology. And what they were basically saying is they want to spend a lot of R&D and leverage this technology to develop products or a technology platform. And so it could be a technology, it could also be a product category. Another company I was working with was in the pump business, and they talked about high pressure, high density pumps and this, that, and the other thing. Those are products, not markets. And so it's more than just market segments and markets. I'm a marketing guy, so I obviously relate very much to that, but I'm fully aware that it might be a technology that you want to focus on, or a technology and market combination. And that's why I showed the product market matrix. It's more than just markets. But good question.
Right. And another sort of related question is, picking the best bets makes sense. Are there scenarios where you pick high-risk bets as your arena?
Ah, yes, and maybe hopping back to that diagram, the high-risk bets are up here. Obviously, if you have a little more money and resources than the next person, you can always afford to take a few chances. If you don't have, if you're not flush with resources, you want to hedge your bets a little bit, maybe stay a little bit in the more conservative and best bet arenas. But yes, I have seen some companies say, you know, X% of our R&D budget is going to go into this arena here. It's a high risk area. We know it's a high risk one, but we have a couple of other ones that are going to balance that off. So, but usually that's for the more innovative company, and the company that's a little more flush with resources is where I see that. For most of us, we don't have that luxury, unfortunately. Interesting thought, though. What percentage is the optimal amount to put into that? It's a bit like in the stock market. Martha's saying, you know, I'm prepared to take 10% of my portfolio and put it in a really, really high-risk stuff, hoping that, heck, I hit gold. But most of us might not do that.
Yeah, the next question pertains to that, and I'll do this one last one and let us move on because we're about 12:35 right now. This is kind of related to this map. How do you increase risk and learn from failure, which you spoke a little to about?
Say that, how do you increase risk and learn from failure?
Yes.
Okay. Usually,
I think probably increasing so that you can increase your bet, right? You're going to the high risk bet. That's my understanding.
Yeah, okay. The second, and I talked a little bit about that, so the second part of the question is how do we learn from failure? And usually the failures that we have are obviously in the specific projects that we execute, specific new products that we launch and don't do so well in the marketplace. And I assume the person who asked that question is talking about those kind of failures. That's usually where failure is manifest. You know, we launched 8 products last year and 6 of them were duds. One of the things that we're going to be talking about, not so much on this seminar, but more in the one in the fall that Delifer is also hosting, and that is basically building in learning techniques into the execution process of product development. Martha, as we were talking earlier this morning about an article that has just been released by me in your wonderful 60th anniversary edition of Research Technology Management, Martha, something that you folks at IRR should be very, very proud of. What a wonderful edition it is. And I have an article in that edition. It's called Agile, Adaptive, and Faster Accelerated Product Development. And there's quite a bit on learning and how we learn from failures. In fact, the notion is get something out there real fast, fail early, fail often, fail cheap, and get the benefits of the learning. And that's part of the Agile methodology that folks in physical products, hardware products, and services like us are learning from the software field, you know, where they get something out there, a couple of screens that don't even work very well, that is, and in order to get customer feedback and learn from the things they messed up and move the project forward. So we spend quite a bit of time, but that's more at the execution level. And that's not so much the strategy stuff we're talking about here, nor the project selection stuff. But I certainly hope people do take a look at that article in your journal, Martha. It's January of 2017, and I think it's called Agile, Accelerated, and Adaptive Product Development, words to that effect. And also there was
the article is called Idea to Launch Gating Systems Better, Faster, and More Agile.
There you go. And it's all about, you know, the Agile methodology, which basically preaches get something out there fast so you can fail, learn, move on. The other one, also in your
call out, Bob.
Sorry?
Oh, just said thank you for the call out.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. So let's move on because I guess we are looking at the time here. It's a major problem. Now moving into portfolio management, you know, a little bit away from strategy. As you can see, there's a lot more to strategy than we have time for in 25 minutes. And that's why we do take the better part of a day one of the 2-day seminar on it. But let's move into portfolio management, which is about project selection and coming up with the right mix and balance of projects. It's a major problem area. And this is data from the APQC studies that we've done over the years. And these, again, are the top performing businesses, which is the dark blue bar, and the average business. And then finally, the light blue is the terrible businesses. And some of the statistics you see here, the first thing is that you see is that just about everybody has too many development projects for the resources available. We're overloading our pipelines. And in some companies, especially the poor performers, where they have a terrible performance here, it's almost gridlock. It's like a traffic on the highway, just not moving at all. The pipeline is so stuffed full of projects. Often the result of not knowing when to say no. Another big problem people have is poor balance, far too many minor projects in the portfolio. I hear comments like our portfolio is just swamped by a lot of little tweaks, modifications, improvements, and very minor Salesforce requests, and it's killing us. It's consuming all the resources. We can't get any big projects out, and that's the next issue. We have few or no high value to the business projects in our portfolio. Another significant issue. Next, we have no project prioritization. All projects are top priority, which of course means none of them are top priority. And finally, we don't even have a portfolio management process in place that helps us make some of these decisions and overcome some of these issues. So lots and lots of key issues here. Too many projects, the wrong kinds of projects, no high value projects, lousy prioritization, and no system in place to right this situation. And that's what the seminar now moves into. For about a day and a quarter, we get into these guts. One of the things you'll notice that while every company seems to suffer to a greater or lesser extent from these ailments, the top performers, the dark blue bars, are suffering a lot less. In other words, they're doing somewhat better on these. Nobody's perfect. But I guess the objective is to get better than the average business here, the medium blue bars. One of the things I mentioned earlier today in this session was strategic buckets. Strategic buckets is an approach to figuring out where you want to spend your money. One of the things we encourage companies to do is create pie charts like this, and this is, I guess, where Deliver's software, Planisware software also helps. And this is a very simple one. Where we're spending our money. Are we looking at, are we spending it on new product projects? Are we spending it in the green area, bold innovations? Or are we just spending our money on a lot of minor projects, extensions, modifications, etc.? Well, that's nice to know where the money was spent last year and the year before. But the issue is, where should it be spent next year? And that's what strategic buckets is all about. The first thing that we get into is management has got to make some strategic choices about where it wants to spend its money going forward. In other words, maybe we spent 5% of our money or 5% of our resources in this green area last year, and we all agree 5% just wasn't enough to move the needle. So we need to spend at least 10% going forward. So management makes some strategic choices based on where they spent money in the past, based on how well they've done with some of these initiatives, and based on where the opportunities are going forward. So they make some choices. And it can be by project type, and this simple little red, green, blue diagram shows project types. But we also encourage them to do it by strategic arenas. And so that would be another pie chart. Or maybe by technologies. Maybe you're into 3 technologies. Where do you want to spend your money? Or maybe by geography. America's projects, Euro projects, Asia Pacific projects, etc. So there's a variety of different ways you can split the resources up. By the way, when I use resources, I mean people or person days as well as money. And then the next step is, let's say you've decided to spend 30% of your money. Last year you're spending 20% on red. You say, that wasn't enough, we should have been spending 30%. So that's the decision. Then the next exercise is, we take all our red projects, all our projects that are underway or just getting underway, coming to typically a gate 2 meeting in the stage gate process. Take all of these red projects and rank them 1 to n. Let's say we got 30 of them, maybe 20 underway, another 10 coming to be underway, and we rank them 1 to 30. And we use some criterion such as a gate score or the net present value or the productivity index. There's a number of different criteria you can use to rank your projects from best to worst. And you rank all the red projects against all the other red projects until you run out of red money, until you run out of red resources. And you draw a line, and everything above that line you do, and everything below that line you put on hold or kill. And this is a very, very deliberate approach to try to force your portfolio. Try to force your portfolio so that your resource allocation, after a couple of years, your resource allocation will really mirror your strategic priorities. So you might start out by saying we want to spend 30% or a third of our resources on red, and right now it's only 20%. After a couple of years, if you do this religiously and vigorously, you will find the needle slowly moves, and after a couple of years steady state, you will actually end up at 30% on red. The other nice thing about this is the red projects are not being compared to blue, and the green projects are not being compared to blue, because when you put them all into one bucket and shake the bucket, guess which ones always rise to the top? The blue ones. The low-hanging fruit, the ones that are certain, fast, cheap. And that's why we end up with a portfolio that is dominated by blue projects. So one of the nice things about this method is not only does it force the needle to cause you to end up with a portfolio that mirrors your strategic priorities. You end up spending your money where you want to spend your money. But number two, you don't end up comparing apples and oranges. You're just comparing red projects against other red projects, green projects against other green ones, etc., which is much fairer to these projects. Otherwise, they always seem to end up losing. It's a very, very powerful technique. It's not unlike what is employed in the stock market when people are making tough decisions about, you know, when you go to see an investment counselor, what proportion do you put in bonds versus stocks versus real estate? You know, that's a fairly traditional argument. And there are methods for figuring out what the appropriate split is. Well, we get into this, how you figure this out. And basically it starts with the business strategy, because from strategy, of course, all else flows. Some of the key inputs we get into discussing in order to help you make this strategic buckets decision starts with your strategy, goals, and objectives. Obviously, that's a key input. Another key input is where the money's been going in the past, because you're never starting with a clean blank piece of paper here. Another key issue is, what do best-in-class businesses do? And we've got some pretty good data that we can share with you on where the top performing businesses, what their breakdowns of spending looks like. I read with interest a Harvard Business Review article not so long ago that basically said that you know, companies basically spend 10% of their money on innovations, another 20-30% on sustaining on new products, and then the rest, I guess about 60-70% on sustaining innovation in improvements and renovations. And they thought this might be a reasonable split. I'm not so sure that is a good split, and it certainly isn't for everybody. And we get into some of these issues of what are the optimal splits. Oh, here's another interesting thing. We take a look at productivity or yields. And think of a farmer putting a seed on 3 different fields, and he measures or she measures the yield, and that influences where they spend their money or where they put their seed the next year. It's the same kind of allocation problem we have. So we look at a number of different factors to determine where one should be placing one's bets. A strategic roadmap is another attempt to figure out where we want to spend our efforts, where we want to spend our money. A roadmap is, strategic buckets is at a point in time. A roadmap is over time. Okay, so here we have, one's a photograph, the other is a video. And here we have the video, and basically looking at how we put together a roadmap of major initiatives, typically about 5 years out. Now I know, as I said before, you can't predict 5 years in advance, but you usually can predict about a year. And so we update this roadmap every year, and we implement the first 5 years, the first year only. And there are some very, very good ways of developing roadmaps. Again, referring back or deferring to Michel Delafer's question, who does this? It's a cross-functional group. In the old days, we used to call it product line planning, and it was typically done by the product manager. No longer. This is a cross-functional group of technical and marketing and sales and production people gathered together in a room to map out the key initiatives. And some of the inputs we look at are the strategy and goals, once again, the existing products. And this is where the product manager brings his or her expertise, understanding that certain products are getting tired and need revitalization, others need to be dumped altogether, others need replacement. Market trend analysis is another key input, along with the voice of customer. And finally, competitive analysis and technology trends and assessments. There's basically 6 key inputs that go into this road mapping exercise, and we do spend some time on the seminar getting into the details of how to do this and how to make it work and how to organize in your business unit for the road mapping. So here we've had 2 strategic portfolio approaches. One is strategic buckets, snapshot. The other is road mapping, video, and both are very, very powerful techniques for translating strategy into reality. And I'll pause just for a second now for questions, but I am cognizant of the fact that time is moving ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bob, we're at 10. Maybe you should,
Yeah.
we do have just a couple of small questions, but I think you can do some more and then we can take any questions if we have time in the last 10 minutes.
Sure.
Thank
you. Now let's move into the next section. The next section of this seminar is getting down into the tactical, making individual project selection decisions. And one of the first things I would say is that if you have a gating process, and most of you have some kind of a stage gate process in place, at least that's been my experience, make sure that's working. I go into too many companies, they say, yeah, we got a stage gate process, it's been around for 20 years, and then you take a hard look at it and you realize it ain't working. People are just going through the motions. If the gates are broken, your process is not working. So one of the things we say is get back to basics, folks. Make sure that those gates are actually making go and kill decisions on projects. Because at least if you have some gates with teeth here, you'll be getting rid of the lousy projects. Everything starts out looking good. That's why the funnel is so broad here. And over time, the objective is to narrow down the field of development initiatives so that you're focused on the best bets. The other comment I'd make here, Martha, is that a lot of people are using gating processes that date back to the 1990s. And you know, I hate to say it, they're hopelessly out of date. The world has moved on, and that article that I was referring to in your wonderful magazine, Research Technology Management, it is dealing basically with much more agile, adaptive, and effective systems that people, big companies like Lego and Honeywell and others have really reinvented their whole new product process in the last few years. This has just happened in the last few years, by the way, and that's what the Planisware's conference in San Francisco is going to be all about, making it adaptive and flexible and agile and accelerated in order to really cut down time to market and also to improve productivity of development teams. But my point here, my first point is make sure your gating process is working, because at minimum, what it will do is get rid of the bad projects if you really have gates with teeth in there. Portfolio management, of course, and I sort of showed a diagram like this before, but this is a bit of a simplification, is a sort of a three-level hierarchy. Up at the top, business strategy and product innovation strategy. Then we spent some time on strategic buckets and roadmaps, and now we're talking about the tactical decisions. And the tactical decisions are typically handled by two kinds of processes, or meetings, if you will. I hate to emphasize meetings and processes, but let's face it, that's the reality. One is your stage gate system that focuses on individual projects where gatekeepers comprised of management has in-depth evaluations of projects. You know, project teams come in the room, present their project data. Quality data, the deliverables to the gate are available. The decision and discussion is by senior management. They make go-kill decisions. I'm not sure why my cursor is having troubles here. They make go-kill decisions right at the gate meeting, and they allocate resources. And that is very key. A gate meeting is not just a go-kill meeting. A gate meeting is an irrevocable commitment of resources to a project leader and his or her team. Over here on the left side, we have another kind of process going underway. It's called the portfolio reviews. These are not real-time, unlike gate meetings. They are periodic, like 4 times a year. The leadership team sits down and does a review of all the significant projects in the portfolio. Now, it's obviously a much quicker review than the gate meetings because you just don't have the time. A gate meeting might be an hour a project. A portfolio review might be 5 minutes of projects. And basically the questions are, do we have the right priorities, the right mix, the right alignment, and so on. And this is done by senior management. So we have 2 processes going on here. And to be very frank, although the meetings are quite different, the kind of tools they use and the kind of information displays that are available at the meetings are much the same. So a lot of these tools and methods see double duty. There are 3 goals in portfolio management or project selection. One is to maximize the value of your portfolio. And here's a trick question, folks. What's your portfolio worth right now? Now, if you personally invest in the stock market like I do, I can pretty well tell you what my portfolio is worth in the stock market. But can you tell me what your portfolio is worth in your R&D portfolio, what it's worth? Interesting question, especially since one objective is to maximize the value of that for a given level of spending. A second goal is to achieve the right mix and balance, not putting all your eggs in one basket between long-term and short-term, high risk and low risk, and across different project types and market sectors. And finally, to ensure that at the end of the day, no matter what you do, your portfolio has got to mirror your strategic priorities, has got to mirror your strategy. So the portfolio is how you're putting your strategy into effect. And also that if you implement this portfolio or execute the portfolio, that you will in fact achieve your objectives. Some of the tools we can use, obviously there's the traditional financial tools. I must confess I'm not a financial guy, and there's more than enough financial people around, I guess, these days in companies. You're all familiar with these tools, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. Net present value, the internal rate of return, the payback period, and finally the productivity index, which is a tool that I think merits a lot more attention than it gets. It was developed by some guy called Dr. Mike Menke in California. It basically deals with maximizing your bang for buck. You calculate your output over input index. It's an index, and you rank projects by this index until you're out of resources. It's a very, very simple calculation once you have all the data in your spreadsheet, but it's a much more powerful technique than just raw net present value or one of the other techniques in terms of picking your best projects. Productivity index, I just give you a chance to think about that. The other thing that you've got to take a look at is financial techniques when there's a lot of unknowns. You know, one of the assumptions in any spreadsheet when you put a number in it, it's a known number. Well, that's not reality in product development. Most of the numbers you put into a spreadsheet never come true. They're numbers pulled out of the air. And when you have small projects, maybe it's not so important that you're wrong a lot of the time. But when you have big, bold projects where there's a lot of money at stake, and I hope you have some of those projects, then you can't avoid dealing with this risk issue. Not every project obviously has a 100% chance of success, and many won't achieve their sales and profit projections. Anybody that's done that analysis of what was in the business case versus what actually occurred realizes that what's in the business case and what actually occurs are sometimes different by orders of magnitude. Some projects will be stopped along the way. Of course, they hit technical roadblocks. How do you handle all these risks and uncertainties? For small projects, it's maybe not that big a deal, but for a big project with a lot of money involved, you can't duck this issue of risks and probabilities. Several
Bob,
ways.
Just a quick time check to let you know we have a few more minutes left.
Okay. I'll wrap up here in a few minutes. Just a quick comment on this. Risk-adjusted discount factors is one way. Probability-adjusted net present value is another way. But the one we spend quite a bit of time on, and it's in one of the articles that I have in Industrial and Research Technology Management, is the expected commercial value. And this is a very powerful technique for dealing with risks. The last method I just want to mention a little bit here is qualitative methods for picking projects. Have you ever noticed lately how much new research in the field of cancer, people are looking at DNA and figuring out what type of diseases people are going to get, what kind of cancers they might get. It's rather remarkable how predictive these markers on DNA have become in the last 10 years of research. Well, one of the questions that's always been asked by people doing research into product development is, do new product projects have markers? Do they have a DNA? Can you predict success and failure by looking at the profile of a project? And the answer is yes. There's been a lot of research done on this. Unfortunately, it's fairly complicated and therefore has not been well disseminated into the practitioner community, but it does exist, and I was involved in some of this early research and worked with several big companies like Procter & Gamble, DuPont, and others as we tried to figure out qualitative factors to predict success, things such as competitive advantage, market attractiveness, leveraging core competencies. And out of this research and work, looking at many successes and many failures and figuring out what the markers were, what the profile of a winner was, we were able to develop predictive models that were far more predictive than financial models. as high as 85% predictive ability to choose a winning project based on qualitative factors before development began. Now, a lot of that was very secret research because it was done within companies at great expense. That has become less and less and more in the public domain, and I share quite a bit of these these models, revolutionary models in terms of helping you pick the right project. Some people say, hey, it's nothing but systematic intuition, looking at qualitative factors, but it is very research-based. We come up with scoring systems based on these factors, a point count system, and we use scorecards right at the gate meetings. And this has proven to be an extremely powerful way of complementing or supplementing your traditional financial models as well. And finally, the risk reward. At the end of the day, you stand back and you look at your portfolio and say, does this make sense in terms of the risks versus the rewards of our portfolio? These are but some of the tools. As I said, this is a very complex, very rich, full-bodied area, and we really don't do it justice in sort of 55 minutes here. And I do hope to see some of you at the seminar, because out of all of this, hopefully, comes an effective portfolio management system, fully integrated, that looks something like this diagram. Martha, I know I've overstayed my welcome a little bit here, but maybe time for a few questions, okay?
Sure, if people are willing to stay, and thank you, Bob, and thank you also, Michelle, for bringing Bob to us. A lot of information in this short period of time. There are a couple things that have come across, and I think we could probably provide email information if people want to follow up afterward as well. But I'll ask a couple of questions. There were a couple of things around kind of strategic buckets and their distributions. One asked around, do we need a strategic bucket for each business unit? And the other was kind of talking a little bit about what are kind of best in class for strategic bucket distributions.
Well, the strategic bucket's best in class. That's a little bit like when you go to a stock market, a financial advisor, and saying, how should I invest my money? Stocks, bonds, and real estate. And there's no one easy answer. I mean, there's little formulas.
And it depends on everybody's risk tolerance, right?
Yeah, and I think we do get into that in the seminar, but it's not the kind of thing I can give a one-liner to. And I think if I did give you a one-liner, you'd be very suspicious of it, and you'd be right to be. So it depends on who you are, and what your tolerance for risk is, and what kind of business you're in, etc. So we will get into that, but I can't give you a one-liner like that Harvard Business Review article tried to, which obviously was very suspect. The other part of that question, Martha, was
kind of our strategic buckets done for each business unit.
Usually, all of this stuff, to be very frank, all of this stuff is a lot easier to operationalize at the business unit level rather than at the corporate level. Now one can obviously aggregate everything from the business units up to the corporate and show what the breakdown of projects is across all our businesses, and at the corporate level there could also be some guidelines. But operationalizing this obviously is a little simpler and makes more sense at the business unit level. Yeah.
Well, good. I see we've gone over, and we've lost a couple people probably because of timing, but I say let's wrap it up now. Again, thank you so much, Bob, and thank you, Michelle, and the folks from Planisware for bringing Bob to us. We will be following up, as I mentioned earlier, with an email to get you copies of the slides and also a link to the recording so that you can share it with others. And we'll try to also pass along some of the questions to Planisware, so if there are some things that you would like to follow up with them, we'll have their email as well so that you can get in touch to get more information. Again, thank you, Bob. And for those of you, our next brown bag will be May 5th at noon. We'll be talking about Goodyear's RTM article on leveraging lean principles in R&D. Thank you again so much, Bob and Michelle, and we look forward to having you with us again. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you.